My sister called me selfish after I stopped paying her bills, and now her husband threatened and cursed me. I laughed, and at family dinner, I shocked them. And then my parents. My name is Emily, and I'm 24 years old. I'm a freelance graphic designer with a passion for all things creative and a stubborn streak that's gotten me into more than a few scrapes with my family. For as long as I can remember, I've lived with my parents in our modest home. It wasn't because I lacked ambition. I was saving every penny to build my portfolio and eventually launch my own design studio. Yet, while I invested in my dreams, my family had a different idea of success. My older sister Melissa was the golden child. Effortlessly pampered, her lifestyle funded by our parents' largesse, while I was constantly told that I was too cheap to leave home. Family dinners were always a battleground. I can still recall one chilly evening when we all gathered around the worn dining table, the clink of cutlery and forced laughter filling the air. As we passed the mashed potatoes, my mom leaned in with a biting remark. "Emily, when are you going to grow up and stop being so miserly? Living at home forever isn't exactly a sign of independence." Melissa, lounging with a self-assured smirk, added, "Yeah, some people never learn how to spend a little. It's just who they are." I sat there, stomach twisting, silently promising that one day the world would see the value in the choices I'd made. Deep inside, I knew that every dollar I sacrificed for Melissa's convenience was a spark that, given time, would set my own future ablaze. And although her words stung, I also knew that change was coming, whether they liked it or not. That fateful evening, as I later sat in my room poring over my budget and planning for upcoming projects, my phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. The message was curt and cutting. "You're so selfish, Emily. Stopping your support is just plain mean." In that moment, my heart pounded with a mixture of anger and relief. I had finally reached a breaking point. I'd spent 3 long years subsidizing her bills, covering her credit card dues, her phone bills, even helping with rent, while my family mocked me for being cheap. I realized that I'd been taken for granted for far too long. Little did I know that this decision to stop paying her bills would soon set off a chain of events that would shock everyone at our next family dinner and force my parents to confront a truth they had long refused to see. I remember the early days of adulthood when I first decided to help Melissa. Fresh out of high school and with dreams bigger than my bank account, I took on every freelance gig I could find. Every extra hour I spent designing logos, every late night coding websites, was money meant for my future. Yet I willingly diverted those funds to cover Melissa's ever-growing bills. I told myself it was family, that sometimes sacrifices had to be made. But the sacrifices came with a bitter price. At every family gathering, I endured a litany of hurtful comments. I recall one holiday dinner vividly. The room was buzzing with chatter and holiday cheer until my mom, with a tone as frosty as the winter air outside, said, "Emily, why can't you ever treat yourself? You're always scrimping and saving. When will you ever enjoy life?" Melissa chimed in with a laugh that cut deep. "Yeah, living at home forever is so lame." Every word burned like acid. I'd sit there, forced smile in place, while inside I recorded every slight. Those moments, the whispered "cheap girl" behind closed doors, the condescending looks as I handed over another check, accumulated like a heavy ledger in my mind. Over time, the financial burden became almost unbearable. I was barely keeping my own head above water, sacrificing dates, outings, even small luxuries, just so I could keep the support coming. And with every sacrifice, my resentment grew. I began to wonder if Melissa even realized the cost of her lifestyle. Did she understand that while she breezed through life with our parents' help, I was left to scrape together a future on scraps? I started jotting down every insult, every dismissive remark in a hidden journal, proof that I was more than the cheap girl they always called me. I loved my sister, I truly did, but I was also tired of being exploited. My creative dreams, once bright and boundless, were slowly dimming under the weight of financial obligation and constant devaluation. Each rejection of my worth, each derisive comment, only fueled a simmering anger that I couldn't ignore. I reached a point where I knew I had to choose between continuing to sacrifice my future or finally standing up for myself, even if it meant shattering the delicate fabric of our family dynamic. It was a particularly chaotic month when everything came to a head. Melissa's phone rang incessantly with overdue notices, and her credit card bill soared to an outrageous sum after yet another splurge, this time on a designer handbag she claimed she needed. I had warned her repeatedly about living beyond her means, but my words fell on deaf ears. That night after dinner, when I was reviewing my bank statements and feeling my heart sink with each bill, I finally decided I couldn't do it anymore. I composed a terse message and hit send. "I'm not paying your bills anymore. This ends now." Almost immediately my phone lit up with angry texts. Melissa's reply was seething. "How dare you be selfish? You're abandoning me." And then, as if that wasn't enough, I got a call from her husband, a hot-headed man known for his volatile temper. His voice was a furious storm. "You think you can just cut us off? You ungrateful little." He went on, cursing and threatening me with such wild language that, despite the gravity of his anger, I couldn't help but laugh a little at the absurdity of it all. His threats were overblown, his curses ridiculously theatrical. I found myself chuckling even as my heart pounded with adrenaline. In the following days, the atmosphere at home turned icy. My parents tried to rationalize my decision, muttering things like, "We always knew you were a stubborn one." While Melissa sulked and ranted about how I was betraying the family, I received a string of calls and texts that only deepened the tension, whispers of selfish and ungrateful from relatives, all while I stood firm in my newfound resolve. Every time I looked at my bank balance, it felt like a declaration of independence. I was finally saying, no more. And yet, deep down, I felt the weight of every sacrifice I had made, each dollar, each sleepless night. I knew that stopping the payments was only the beginning. I sensed that the upcoming family dinner would be the perfect stage for a showdown, a chance to force everyone to confront the truth of what I'd endured and what I was no longer willing to tolerate. In the weeks that followed my decision, I started to compile a digital archive of every hurtful moment. I saved texts where I was called selfish and cheap, recorded voice messages from heated phone calls, and even snapped photos of our family's mocking expressions during past gatherings. This archive wasn't meant to be a weapon against them. It was a reminder of how much I had given and how little gratitude I'd received. Every evening, I would sit in my small, dimly lit room at home and reflect on the past 3 years. I jotted down my feelings in a battered journal, each entry a cathartic release of pent-up anger and sorrow. I asked myself, how long can I let them define my worth by my sacrifices? The more I read over those entries, the more I realized that my life had been overshadowed by their narrow expectations. I began rehearsing what I would say at the next family dinner, my voice growing steadier with every practice session. I wanted to deliver my truth in a way that was both raw and controlled, a perfect blend of hurt and determination. Late one evening, just a few days before the big dinner, I received a call from a distant cousin who hinted that Melissa's husband planned to escalate his threats at the gathering. His tone was urgent, and it confirmed what I already suspected. The tension was about to boil over. My heart raced as I realized that this dinner would be more than just another family get-together. It would be the moment of reckoning. I closed my journal, took a deep breath, and promised myself that come what may, I would no longer let their insults define my future. I was ready to shock them all, to force them to see the cost of their entitlement once and for all. The night of the family dinner arrived on a cool autumn evening. Our parents' old house, with its creaking floors and familiar, comforting smells of home-cooked food, was packed with relatives who had come to celebrate an occasion, a birthday, a holiday, something that, until now, had masked the underlying tension with forced cheer. I walked in with a quiet determination, every step echoing the resolve that had been building within me. The dining room was set immaculately, a long table adorned with candles, fine china, and silverware that had seen better days. The air was thick with polite chatter and the occasional snicker that I had learned to ignore. But tonight was different. As the courses were served and conversations meandered around trivial matters, I felt the familiar sting of judgment every time someone glanced at me. I knew it was time. When the dessert was nearly finished and the room was settling into a lull, I stood up abruptly. The sudden clatter of my chair drew every eye to me. My voice, though trembling slightly at first, soon gained strength as I began. I have something important to say. A heavy silence fell over the room, as if time itself had paused to listen. I looked directly at Melissa, whose eyes widened in shock, and then at my parents, faces that betrayed disbelief and a dawning horror. For years, you've called me selfish for living simply, for saving every dime while I paid your bills. I've sacrificed my own future to support your sister's lifestyle, and I've endured every insult, every mocking laugh. Tonight, I say enough is enough. I continued, my tone growing firmer with each word. I remember every time you said, "You're such a cheap girl, Emily," as if my choices were a crime. I remember the way you laughed when I handed over my paycheck, like it was a joke. Well, I'm not laughing anymore. I'm standing up for myself. I'm done being your charity. My words rang out, raw and unfiltered, as I revealed the digital archive I'd kept, a silent testament to every hurtful moment. The reaction was instantaneous. Melissa's eyes filled with tears and her husband's face contorted in anger as he shouted, "How dare you!" My parents exchanged glances that spoke of shock and regret. The room erupted in a chaotic mix of murmurs and exclamations. Some relatives tried to protest, while others sat frozen, unwilling to believe what they were hearing. "I'm not here to tear this family apart," I said softly, "but I refuse to let you define my worth by your shallow standards. I have built a life on my own terms, one that is rich in passion and creativity, not measured by the money you squander and the insults you fling. Tonight, I reclaim my dignity. I'm walking away from this toxic cycle, and I want you all to know that my future belongs to me alone." As my words echoed in the stunned silence, the tension in the room shifted to raw, unfiltered emotion. Melissa's husband, red-faced and trembling with anger, launched into a tirade of curses and threats. I could hear him shouting, "You're nothing but a freeloader, Emily. You think you can just cut us off and walk away?" His words were violent and profane, yet as he raged, I couldn't help but feel a wry amusement at the absurdity of it all. His threats sounded empty now, a desperate attempt to regain control over a situation that had clearly passed him by. I met his anger with a steady gaze and a wry smile. "I'm sorry," I said, "but your threats don't scare me anymore. They never did. I'm laughing because, for the first time, I see the hypocrisy in all of this. You and the rest of you have always depended on me, on my sacrifices, while you cast me aside. And now, when I stop giving, you're desperate enough to curse me?" My words, delivered calmly, cut through the tension like a knife. The room was charged with emotion as relatives began to speak up. A cousin, who had always been quiet, whispered, "I always thought you were strong, Emily. Maybe you're right." Others murmured in agreement, their voices a mixture of regret and newfound respect. My parents tried to interject with apologies, but I wasn't finished. "I want you to understand," I continued, "that this isn't about revenge, it's about respect. My respect for myself, and I hope yours for me. I have every right to stop being taken advantage of. I've been your savings account, your safety net, your punching bag, and tonight I say no more." Every word felt like a release of years of pent-up pain. I watched as Melissa's face crumpled, her eyes welling up with tears, and as my father's shoulders slumped in disbelief. In that moment, the carefully maintained illusion of our family's unity shattered completely. The room was silent for a long, agonizing moment, a silence that spoke of regret, anger, and the inevitability of change. Finally, with a voice full of quiet finality, I declared, "I am leaving this dinner and this toxic environment for good. I've reclaimed my future, and I won't let anyone tell me my worth again." With that, I turned and walked toward the door, every step echoing my determination. The aftermath of my announcement was immediate and chaotic. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I could hear a cacophony of shouts, tears, and desperate calls for me to reconsider. Behind me, the warm glow of the dining room flickered uncertainly, as if reflecting the crumbling facade of a family that had taken my sacrifices for granted for too long. I paused on the front steps, the cold biting at my cheeks, and looked back one last time. Through the window, I saw my parents huddled together, their expressions a tangled mix of shame and sorrow. Melissa sat slumped at the table while her husband fumed, still spewing curses that now seemed distant and hollow. In that charged moment, I felt a profound mix of liberation and grief. I was free, but at the cost of severing bonds I had once thought unbreakable. For days afterward, the news of the confrontation spread like wildfire. Relatives called, old family friends texted, even strangers, having heard words of the scandal, reached out with messages of support. My phone buzzed incessantly with both praise and condemnation. I found solace in the fact that many, even those I never expected, recognized the courage it took to stand up for myself. Yet there was also a sharp pang of loss. An understanding that I was now alone, in a way I had never been before. I spent several sleepless nights reflecting on everything that had happened. I reread the messages, listened again to the recorded threats, and pored over the journal entries that chronicled every insult and every sacrifice. I realized that the scars of the past would never completely fade, but they could serve as reminders of my strength and resilience. I was no longer defined by the narrow expectations of a family that had only ever seen me as a bank account. I had reclaimed my dignity, and that was worth more than all the money in the world. Slowly, I began to accept that this was the turning point I had longed for, a painful yet necessary break from a cycle of sacrifice and unappreciation. I vowed that I would never again allow anyone to dictate my worth or control my future. As I walked away from that dark, tumultuous night, I carried with me a quiet determination to build a life defined by my own passion, creativity, and self-respect. In the months that followed, I set about rebuilding my life from scratch. I moved out of my parents' house into a small but bright apartment in a lively part of the city, a space that I could finally call my own. With every new day, I poured my energy into my creative work. My design projects started to gain recognition, and I landed commissions that pushed my art to new heights. I hosted my first solo exhibition at a local gallery, where people marveled at the raw emotion and honesty in my work. Each success, no matter how small, was a step toward reclaiming the future that had once seemed so distant. I reconnected with the friends who had always believed in me, those who saw beyond labels like cheap or selfish. We spent long nights talking about art, life, and the courage it takes to defy societal norms. Their support helped fill the void left by a family that had only ever valued me for my sacrifices. I began to document my journey, not just the artistic milestones, but the emotional ones too. Every journal entry became a testament to my growth, from a girl who quietly bore the weight of unending financial support to a woman who boldly declared her independence. Slowly, the wounds began to heal. The painful memories of being called names and taken for granted were replaced by a deep, unwavering sense of self-worth. I realized that the insults I'd endured were not reflections of my character, but of their own limitations. My art, once a desperate plea for validation, now stood as a proud declaration of who I was: creative, resilient, and fiercely independent. New opportunities emerged that I never dreamed possible. I collaborated with fellow creatives, launched a successful online shop for my designs, and even received invitations to speak at industry events. With each new project and every compliment, I felt my spirit soar higher. I learned that true happiness isn't found in the approval of others, it's found in living authentically and passionately on your own terms. Yet, even as I flourished professionally, I couldn't entirely forget the family I'd left behind. There were moments of bittersweet reflection. Quiet afternoons when I'd think about the person I used to be, bound by sacrifice and obligation. But rather than dwell in regret, I chose to see those memories as fuel for my journey forward. I came to understand that every insult and every hardship had prepared me for this moment of liberation. One crisp morning, as sunlight streamed through the window of my new apartment and the city buzzed quietly outside, I stepped onto my small balcony and took a deep, steadying breath. I felt the cool air on my face and a profound sense of calm wash over me. I thought back on everything: the years of sacrifice, the sting of every selfish remark, the bitter taste of my sister's husband's curses, and I smiled. I realized that those dark moments had forged me into the person I was today. Someone who knows her own worth and isn't afraid to fight for it. I met up with a few of my closest friends later that day at a bustling cafe downtown. As we sat together, laughing and sharing stories about the wild turns life can take, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I was free to create, free to love, and free to live without the crushing weight of others' expectations. I shared my story openly, not out of bitterness, but as a testament to the power of standing up for yourself. They called me selfish, a cheap girl, and cursed me, I said. But look at me now. I'm living a life that's truly mine. I know my journey is far from over. There will always be challenges and moments of doubt, but I have learned that true happiness comes from within. As I look to the future, I do so with hope and excitement. I'm building a career, a life, and a future that are defined by my own passion and creativity. And while I may never fully repair the bonds with the family I once knew, I am at peace knowing that I have finally reclaimed my destiny. So here's to new beginnings, to living unapologetically, and to the quiet, unstoppable power of believing in yourself. My past may have been filled with sacrifice and hurt, but it has also paved the way for a future that is as bright and boundless as the art I create. I will always remember where I came from, but I will never let it hold me back again.